Good evening, everybody. Welcome to part 6 of our series, Sex, Love, Marriage, and the Baby Carriage. Let me ask you a question. What do you fight most about as a married couple? Parenting issues? Leisure time? Sexual frequency? We've talked about that the last 2 or 3 weeks. I would guess it's probably none of those things. I would guess it's probably the same thing most couples fight about, and that is finances or money. Because for all of my lifetime, that has been the number one cause of divorce in the United States. Finances, money. It's the number one source of conflict in marriages. In fact, George Gallup reports that 67% of all couples worry regularly about money. 51% of couples that call it quits, Gallup said their decision had something to do with dispute over their finances. So the Bible tells us over and over again that the love of money or misuse of money can be a very dangerous thing. God warns us that these little inanimate objects that we keep in banks and wallets and purses made out of either paper or plastic can be powerful enough to divide spouses. Some husbands and wives who pledge to stay together till death do us part end up fighting over their finances and end up rewording that last part of their marriage vow so that they only remain together until debt do us part. I mean, money can destroy a marriage relationship quicker than any other form of disagreement. And so Dave Ramsey, who, if you need any kind of financial advice or study, all of Dave Ramsey's is Christian-based, and I would highly recommend it. And he said couples in healthy marriages are twice as likely to discuss money dreams together. 94% of great marriages have handled the situation of finances, or in crisis marriages, or they're just okay, 45%. That's a remarkable statistic, and it suggests to us how much we need to focus on finances and money in a healthy marriage relationship. I love the old story about a husband and wife named Stumpy and Martha who went to the state fair every year, and they were just an old country couple, barely made it through living, and every year when Stumpy saw the antique biplane that was there, he'd say, "Martha, I'd sure like to ride in that airplane." And Martha always said the same thing, "I know you would, Stumpy, but that airplane ride costs $50, and $50 is $50. And every year, year after year, they had this same little dispute. Until one year at the fair, Stumpy said, "Martha, I'm 80 years old. If I don't ride that airplane, I may never get another chance in my life." And Martha said, "I know you want to, Stumpy, but that airplane ride costs $50, and $50 is $50. The pilot, for the first time, overheard them. And he said, "Folks, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I'll take you up for a ride, and if you can stay quiet for the entire ride and not say a single word, I won't charge you. But if I can get you to say even a single word, you owe me the full price." And Stumpy and Martha agreed. And so he took them up in the plane. The pilot did all kinds of twists and turns and rolls and dives. Not a single word from the couple. He did all of his tricks that he does over and over again, flips and dives and rolls. Not a single word. When they finally landed, the pilot looked back at Stumpy and said, "I gotta say, I'm impressed. I did everything I could possibly do to get one of you to cry out, but you didn't. I'm surprised." And Stumpy said, "Well, I was gonna say something when Martha fell out of the plane after that first roll, but $50 is $50. Usually in the beginning, a couple's financial conflicts come from the fact not so much that they don't have a lot of money, but they don't know how to handle their money. And so I want us to go to the best financial book in the world for advice on that. And that book is the Bible, God's written word, because God knows what's best for money management. In fact, there's a book in the Bible that was penned by the wisest and richest man in the world. Did you get that? The wisest man in the world, so he knows what's right. The richest man in the world, so he has experience with riches. And if you've guessed that I'm referring to King Solomon, you're right on the money, because he was very, very wealthy. So wealthy, he would put Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates to shame. The Bible, for instance, tells us that Solomon ate on plates of solid gold. Solid gold. Solomon's everyday china was very heavy. I mean, when he finished dinner, they didn't just wash the plates, they polished them. And instead of putting them back in the kitchen or the dining room cabinets, they put them back in the vault. I mean, that's rich. Solomon was extravagantly wealthy, and God inspired him to write down in the Proverbs all kinds of advice. And he did a lot of that concerning money. And the first thing we find that he writes there is, if you want to be successful financially, keep track of your finances. This is the principle for accounting, and Solomon refers to it in Proverbs 27. Know the state of your flocks, and put your heart into caring for your herds. For riches don't last forever, and the crown might not be passed to the next generation. Now, I find this interesting. He says, know the state of your flocks. That is, keep track, keep account of your flocks. In Solomon's day, instead of stocks, they had flocks. Some people still do. When I was a young preacher in Chapel Hill, Tennessee, almost all of my deacons in my church were dairy farmers. And I asked one of them one time how many cows he had, and he said, don't ever ask a farmer that question. He said, that's like asking somebody how much money they got in the bank. They don't want to tell you that. But back then in Solomon's day, a man's herds were his assets, and it was a shepherd's job to keep track of its size and the condition as well of his flock. So in this verse, Solomon is saying the very first thing we must do to prevent money conflicts is very basic. You got to know exactly what you got. You've got to keep track of what you've got. You've got to be constantly aware of the state of your accounts. Have you ever said or heard somebody say, I don't know where all my money goes? Well, you know you got your paycheck, you know you deposited into your checking account. Before you know it, you're relying on overdraft protection and counting on the next paycheck and the next payday to come. If you don't know where your money goes, then unless someone is stealing it from behind your back, you must not be keeping good records. Someone used to say, money used to talk, now it just quietly slips away. And one of the reasons we need to keep track and good records is so that it doesn't just slip away. Solomon puts it this way in Proverbs 13:16. Wise people think before they act. Fools don't. So wise people think about their money before they act. We need to keep track of our finances. I almost brought today a book that Diane has, and it's a big, thick plastic notebook that is about that thick. And it has like 10 areas or chapters in it with every single area of our finances, retirement coming, investments, insurance policy, everything that you can possibly imagine. And that has been so good for us because it has allowed us through the years to go to it and say, well, do we have the money to do this or that? Well, maybe we don't at this time. And so our financial record keeping allows us to know 4 things. Exactly what we owe, what we own, what we earn, and where it all goes. And I've found that Solomon is right. Knowing where my money is and where it goes helps me to not worry about it so much. Find a way to keep track of your money. Now, one spouse may be in charge of this, but even if they are, they should share it with the other spouse so that both can know where the money comes and goes. That will go a long way toward reducing marital disagreements over time. So, first of all, keep track. Second thing Solomon advises is plan ahead. In Proverbs 21:5, we read, good planning and hard work lead to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty. Did you notice that? Good planning and hard work lead to prosperity. But even before hard work was good planning. Financial freedom is not always just determined by how much money we make, but how we spend what we make. That's why Solomon said we need a plan. We need a budget to follow. For most of us, the problem is we spend too much, and one reason we spend too much is because we shop too much, whether that's at the mall or the store, or certainly today, online on the internet. Surveys show that 9 out of 10 people don't shop carefully, they shop impulsively. Did you hear that? 9 out of 10 people shop impulsively. That is, they haven't planned their spending. They don't have a budget, and if they do, they don't stick to the budget plan because they end up still buying more than they can afford. Now, why would we do that? Well, first of all, there's the incredible power and influence of the media. Every billboard or magazine ad says, don't plan your spending. Look at this thing and buy it. Hour after hour of television ad or internet ads urge us to buy. And they're very good at this. They get the most effective people in advertising, the top script writers, the top actors and actresses and musicians and production people who combine forces to get us to do one thing: spend money. And there are constant ads to spend impulsively. I don't know about you, but I'm old enough to remember where there were annual ads. Do you remember that? Now they're every weekend, maybe every day. We get ads and special coupons in our mailbox and in our email box and on our text just about every single day. And a lot of us simply cannot resist this. So we end up buying things even if we don't need them just because they're on sale or just because somebody else has them. And then, poof, our spending plan goes out the window. That's foolish. Because Solomon said in Proverbs 21:20, the wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. Fools spend whatever they get. Now that can look good early on in life, and you can look sharp and glitzy, but then later on in life you find you have no money because you've spent poorly, saved hardly at all, and increased debt. Prevention Magazine did an article not long ago called, "Are You a Shopaholic?" And in the article, it cited supports for groups of shoppers, like Shopper Stoppers is one of them, or Debtors Anonymous is another. And they mentioned some creative ideas that help people break the habit of blowing their budget with impulse buying. For instance, one shopper keeps his credit cards frozen in a chunk of ice in the freezer. That way, if he gets the urge to spend, he has to go home, get the chunk of ice out of the freezer, and wait for the ice to melt. And by that time, he said almost always the urge to buy has gone away. Some of us with diminished willpower might want to try something like that. I did when we were younger. We had a man named Malin Hetrick come to our church when we were over on McGregor Boulevard, and he was a financial guy here in town, a financial counselor. And he suggested this. He said, take your credit cards out of your pocket and go lock them away somewhere so that you have to go get them if you want to use them. So I did that. I took our credit cards, I put them all in an envelope and locked them away in my church office in a closet in a sermon file and forgot about them. never used them again. When we moved from our building in 2007, I had forgotten they were even in there. And as I was cleaning out the files and had to move out, throw some things away, and get ready to move things here to this location, I found them, had never used them, and had never missed them. One of the best ways to break the habit of impulse buying is budgeting and having a financial plan and sticking to the plan no matter what. Now, one of the popular versions is what's called the 70% rule. It's also called the 10-70-20 budget. It works like this. First, you pay God 10%, then you pay your taxes, then you take 10% of what is left over and save it or invest it. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And then you use the other 70% to live on. The trick is learning to live on that 70%. But the point is, no matter what plan you use, is have a budget and stick to it. Solomon said in Proverbs 21:5, careful planning puts you ahead in the long run. Hurry and scurry puts you further behind. Almost none of us would consider driving our cars without a gas gauge, because we would know the dangers and inconveniences associated with running out of gas. But a lot of couples operate their personal finances without a spending gauge. Now, how smart is that? They casually, impulsively spend from day to day, and then when they run out of money at the end of the month, they say, oops, I'm out of money. What do I do now? Solomon said, don't do that. Plan ahead. And then he also said, save regularly. And he used some bugs, of all things, as an example of those who know how to save regularly. In Proverbs 6, he said, take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. Learn from their ways and become wise, though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work. They labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. What's he saying? Even the bugs are smart enough to save. They don't consume all their resources. They save some, storing it away for the future. Now look, I know how hard that is. I know that we're living in a live for the moment, live for today culture. We want it all, and we want it all now. But we have to remember, Solomon says that's foolish. The wise man saves for the future. The foolish man spends whatever he gets. If you will put aside some every month, it's amazing how much you will accrue. Let's talk about that for just a second and use very simple numbers, okay? Very simple numbers. And you can find these numbers anywhere. You can adjust the totals any way that you want to. Let's just assume for the moment you make $40,000 a year. $40,000 a year is probably a little below what most people make, even in our area. And so let's just say you make $40,000 a year. And you put aside 10%. That's $4,000. These are easy numbers to think of. And you do that every year for 30 years. And you invest it in a secure fund. After 30 years, you would have nearly $500,000. And that's if you are saving 10% of an annual salary of $40,000. Did you get that? Now, I confess that I have to discipline myself to look at savings as just another bill to pay. In fact, we've had it deducted from our checking account for years, just like our house payment or other payments would be. Find a way to do it consistently. This wise man, Solomon, said, dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. You know what he's referring there to? He's referring to the magic of compound interest. If you grow a nest egg Then when the car breaks down, your relationship will be saved the stress of worrying how you're going to have the money to fix it. Simply put, compound interest is interest on top of interest. You start earning interest to the point where you are making interest on top of interest. And then you have money stored away for the rainy day. I could go on and on this point about saving regularly, but we have to move on to talk a little bit about what Solomon says next, and that is decreasing debt, because nothing is called more marital misery than the burden of debt. And I'm not talking about having a mortgage, we have to have that, or I'm not talking about paying rent, we have to do that, or even financing a car as long as the car is worth more than the payoff. I'm talking about consumer debt, credit card debt, debt that is non-secured, the kind of debt that can pile up and haunt you and you pay exorbitant interest rates on all the days until you pay it off. Solomon had something to say about that too. He said, just as the rich rule the poor, so the borrower is servant to the lender. Now, there are two phrases that people around our church have heard me say for 30 plus years, and they will continue to hear me say them over and over and over again until I'm gone. And one of them I'm going to say in next week's lesson, and this one I'm saying in tonight's lesson. How many times have people heard me say, you either pay interest or you earn interest? Much, much better to earn interest. It's like being paid twice. Paying interest is like having to pay twice or more. And so make sure you understand this principle of decreasing debt. Part of the problem is using credit cards is easy. There have been a lot of studies that have shown that when we shop with a credit card or online with plastic, we spend 23% more money than we would do if we were paying cash. That's because using a credit card or just punching a button online doesn't feel like we're using real money until the bill comes in. It doesn't feel the same as pulling out our billfold and pulling cash out. There was an interesting book that came out a few years ago called The Overspent American that addressed this issue. It was written by a Harvard University professor named Juliet Shore, and she researched the spending habits of the typical American consumer and said that back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, Americans compared or measured their standard of living with their neighbors. That's where the phrase keeping up with the Joneses came from. But according to Shore, we don't do that anymore. We don't know our neighbors well enough in most cases to know what to keep up with. So instead, she said, most consumers today compare their standard of living with the people they see on TV or what people are telling them on Facebook or Twitter or social media. Many times, people whose incomes are double, triple, or even 4 or 5 times or more what they make. So according to the professor, the majority of Americans are trying to emulate the lifestyle and spending habits of the richest of the rich. And if she's right, and I think she is, it's no wonder credit card debt is out of control and just keeps rising higher and higher and higher. One last thing that Solomon said in his book that we have to take seriously and keep account of if we want to follow God's will and God's way concerning wealth. Solomon says when it comes to managing our money, we must give regularly. The Bible says this over and over again. Proverbs 3:9 says, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce. With the best part of everything you produce. That is what the tithe was all about all the way back in the book of Genesis. Why do we do this? Why do we give at least that much back to God? Well, first, we do it as an act of obedience because the Bible repeatedly and clearly told us that giving that standard back to God is what He expects and what He wants. But it's also an act of gratitude. When you give back to God, you're saying, God, I realize, I know that I wouldn't have anything if it were not for you. And then it's an act of priority. It's a way of saying, God, I want you to be number one in my life, and I demonstrate it by putting you first in my money. Yours is the first check I will write. It's also an attitude, an act of faith that says, God, I know all those promises in the Bible that say if I take care of you and honor you, you will take care of me. I'm showing you this way that I am believing your promises. It is an act of faith. And Solomon says, those who oppress the poor are insulting their maker, but helping the poor honors him. You give back, and God blesses that financially. I want to challenge you to not fall prey to Satan's attempts in the world to get your marriage sidetracked and maybe even divided ultimately by this problem of money management and finances. Learn how to manage your money right now so you can avoid the financial difficulties of marriage. And if you haven't done so already, give God control of your finances. Don't just invite him into your heart. Invite him into your checkbook and into your marriage. Next week, we're going to talk about a subject that's very, very important. In fact, I think these 2 weeks are the two most important of the entire series because they deal with the biggest problems in marriage. We're going to talk basically about how to fight right in marriage, how to overcome personal conflict. I hope you'll join us then. God bless you.